So this lecture, we're going to be exploring Auguste Comte, and so we might as well jump straight in. Now, what we have on the slide is a map of the key contributions that he has made. And what we want to do is ultimately focus on some of these things in the lecture. So we're going to highlight two of the main things here and really expand upon them. So the first thing, he's often considered the founder of sociology. Now, this is somewhat correct in the sense that he coined the term sociology and he attached to it specific principles and methods. Now, ultimately, how he understood sociology, it was going to be this kind of science of society. Now, ultimately, his vision for this discipline of sociology was that it was meant to encompass all other sciences. So all other sciences, from biology, astronomy, etc., were going to come under the umbrella of sociology. Sociology would be this grand method to understand and study society. Now, that was his kind of vision, that he wanted to create this all-encompassing science and sociology at the head of it. Now, what he stated to achieve this, to make sociology this science of society, you had to draw from the scientific kind of principles. So what he did is he constructed first what he considered a scientific base. So what is the scientific base? So for him, the scientific base essentially deals with two aspects. You need to have an objective kind of observation of reality. Truth has to be discovered through objectivity and empiricalism. So in essence, truth is something that is discovered in the natural world through the kind of objective understanding of it. So you need to be able to sense it, perceive it, has to exist in the physical world. So in essence, what the scientific base does is it reduces reality to the physical, because the physical can be tested, examined empirically. So this scientific base is what we use to determine truth, and it entails looking at the scientific method, right? The scientific kind of knowledge in some ways. So this is important because if you think about the social thinkers that we're going to look at, say for example Marx, Weber, Durkheim, none of these individuals studied sociology. They weren't, they didn't go to university and study sociology. They studied history, philosophy, economics. So in essence, what that suggests as well is that Comte did kind of coin the term, associate certain principles with sociology, but the contribution made also by the other social thinkers builds eventually sociology into a fixed discipline, meaning it had fixed boundaries, fixed methods. But ultimately, Comte's vision was never really materialized. The other aspect is social dynamics. Now here, the kind of central question relates to how society evolves and how it changes. So Comte's focus is he really wanted to understand how does society, this dynamic thing, this complex thing, evolve and change. And the kind of answer to this was the law of the three states, which we're going to examine. The law of the three states, in simple terms, takes society, or the history and the development of humankind, and splits it into three kind of categories. Now, what is evolving is the human mind. In essence, what this suggests, this law of the three states, it's basically how society as a whole transitions through certain specific phases in history intellectually. So you're going through intellectual jumps. We begin with the theological stage, which we're going to look at. You have the metaphysical stage, which is like a transition to the end stage, which is positivism. So for Comte, what he argued is that the human mind is essentially transitioning through these stages, these states, and it's becoming more refined And as we then understand nature better, we're moving towards science to navigate the social world. Anyway, we're going to look at that in detail, don't worry. And then lastly, his major contribution is also this idea of positivism. So what is positivism, just quickly, before we kind of look into it? So it's kind of what we're talking about. The doctrine of positivism states that you need authentic knowledge, and the way authentic knowledge is ascertained is by acquiring specific scientific principles and methods, right? So in essence, what positivism is it's the affirmation of scientific theory and scientific method. So ultimately, if you look at it, truth exists in the natural world. It exists in our physical universe. So you, as the human agent, have to access that truth. That truth, like we said, has to be reducible to reality, which means it has to be perceivable. It has to be perceived by your senses. You have to be able to examine it, touch it. You have to be able to take it and put it under the metaphysical kind of microscope, if you will. So it has to be perceivable, and once it's perceivable, you can then test it. So in essence, you can't prove through the scientific method the existence of angels or ghosts. They exist outside of reality. They are not reduced to the physical. So we're talking about how to study the physical reality, the physical world. And there has to be a method to it. And that's what Comte is arguing, that there has to be a particular method to interpreting society according to these scientific principles. But we will go into it in a little bit more depth. Is there any questions so far? Cool. Before we go into some of Comte's observations, his arguments, his law of three states, we need to first understand the context. So he emerges in the kind of aftermath of the French Revolution, the post-revolution period. Now this period is hectic. It's seen major upheaval. So French society has just experienced the revolution, which has created social upheaval. It's kind of caused a lot of social issues. And so there is this quest by aspects of society to rebuild. We need to rebuild society. We need to repair the damage. And that damage has been done to every fabric of French society, the social structures and so forth. So what Comte says then is, okay, he says, how can any kind of political community be forged in a society peopled by individuals shorn of traditional social bonds? Any idea what he's trying to say here? So if we're looking to repair the social structures that have been damaged post-French Revolution, then we need to see that actually before the revolution, there was a social order. There was a system that brought people together, that bound people together. So you had things like traditionalism, you had the church, and you had the monarch. Now these things provided stability. They provided order. In essence, what these three things did, they gave society a purpose. Why are they here? Where are they going? It gave them a world view, which is important for solving problems. You know, what is right? What is wrong? How do I determine right and wrong truth? These are dictated, obviously, by things like the higher authority, the church. So, in essence, the structures before had a connected system. They provided people, they fulfilled people's needs. So they gave a sense of purpose, worldview, identity, how they fit into that society. Now, because it's not just one or two people that carry that worldview or purpose, so the social system before, the structures before the revolution, provided unity to society. It gave them collective purpose, collective meaning. Now, what's happened after the revolution is essentially we have a society of individuals. Now, all of these structures are fading away and are kind of being removed. And now we have a society of individuals, not really anchored to anything. Those social structures that provide a connected system are fading away. So how do you bind this society of individuals? Liberalism came along, obviously, after the revolution and said, look, what you have in society is a fixed constitution, right? This constitution gives individuals a specific set of rights. And these are protected by the constitution, and each individual has those indivisible rights. Now, this is the kind of what is forming as the new system. So what you have is this kind of old system and new system. But the problem is that in between, we looked at that functionalism before last week. What we have is the old, let's say, worldview, or the criteria that people agree upon as the basis, what Durkheim sometimes refers to as social facts. This is eroding because in society, what we have is competing ideas now. We've got the new forming and the old dying, and that erodes the basis of society, is what Comte is saying. Now, the next point that he makes that's important is he says that this process is irreversible. What does he mean by this? That it is irreversible. So we've gone from pre-modern society to becoming modern. That process cannot be halted, and that process in particular cannot be reversed. We can't undo the Enlightenment, and we can't undo the Industrial Revolution and revert back to pre-modern society. That society now has gone, and therefore you can't look backwards, you have to look forward to what is going to be created in this kind of modern society. Now, the whole focal point of this discussion that Comte is introducing to us is the issue of reorganizing society. So the post-revolution has created a vacuum and has created instability. The new society, this society of individuals, needs to be kind of bound together, united, organized. So this is an important kind of theme. So again, what he's referring to here, and we've kind of touched upon it, but just to reiterate it, what he's saying here is that you have two opposing tendencies, two opposing forces. You have the old social order, which we talked about, and you have the new one. Now the problem is the old system is in a process of dying. So let's just say, for example, you had the absolute monarch. The absolute monarch is basically crumbling, and it's a dying, basically, system. Now, at the same time, what we have is the emergence of the modern new system, right? Now, this new system, for a period, coexist. So the old structures don't completely disappear, and you have the establishment of the new system. There is a period of coexistence. This transition from old to new, and this transition is what creates disorganization, because here you have the new system and it's taking shape. It's not achieved its definitive form. It's establishing itself. So while it establishes itself and the old dies, what that creates is tension and disorganization in essence. So in this period of disorganization, what happens, what Comte argues, is that you have different groups emerge. Things like conservatives, liberals. The conservatives on one side are arguing that basically, look, to build or to restructure society, to reorganize it, we need to connect to the past. We need tradition, because these things give us a sense of collective identity. These give us unity. So the thing is, the aspects of the old, they're saying we need remnants of it in the new. We need perhaps traditionalism. We need aspects of monarchy in the new, because these things are what people know. They kind of remember, they kind of grow up with. So in essence, if you rip these things away from people, they're not going to find solidification in the new system. So in essence, they provide that sense of communal collectivism, is what they're advocating. Liberals on the other side are saying, no, we want a new society built on liberty, freedom, self-agency. This is the new society that we're building. Now, what Comte is just commenting on is really that this process creates disorganization. Now, Comte's response to the kind of reactionary critics of the French Revolution is also worth noting. Now, he here argues, if we look at what he's saying here, he says, the fall of the feudal and theological system does not stem, as they think, from recent isolated and, so to speak, accidental causes. Instead of being the effect of the crisis, it is on the contrary its source. The decline of this system has taken effect gradually over the preceding centuries by succession of modifications to which, independent of any human will. And he goes, all classes of society have contributed, and of which the kings themselves have often been the primary agents or the most ardent promoters. It has been, in short, the necessary consequence of the course of civilization. What is he trying to say in this very long statement here? So first, it's worth noting that what Comte is saying about reorganization, there are two ways that society can be reorganized. It can be done through the kings, but the problem with the kings is that they do not really speak for the people. They don't represent the people. And then on the other side, you have the other way that it can be reorganized, which is through the people. The people, for Comte, represent the nation. So in essence, he's saying that, somewhat similar to Rousseau, that authority will always reside in the hands of the people. And you can give it through consent or it can be taken, but ultimately the people have the power to shape what happens in the material world, what happens in terms of the political, social structures. Now, this statement, if you look at it, relates to his critique in some ways of the French Revolution. Now, if you look at the French Revolution is seen as a political event, right? It's seen as one political order being ripped away and a new political order being established. Now, for Comte, the problem here is that that doesn't actually deal with other important factors, other important variables. So in particular, what's he trying to say? How is the French Revolution not just a political episode? So what he's referring to in particular is the rise of the middle classes. He says this has an important bearing on the gradual French Revolution. How does the rise of the middle class impact the French Revolution? Any ideas on that? So what he basically claims is, historically speaking, the middle class have been gaining upward mobility. This is over a period of generations. This is gradual, slowly moving up the social, economic hierarchy, right? So they're gradually gaining social mobility. What happens when you gain and elevate yourself in society? You gain social mobility. What happens as a group, perhaps? You get more influence, right? So they grow in influence, their consumer ability and these things. I think it's worth noting, I should mention, how Comte defines the middle class is he considers the middle class the producers of society, the ones who produce, right? And so they obviously over time gain more and more socio-economic mobility. This means they can have greater influence on society, which eventually leads to their emancipation. But emancipation from what? Who have they been enslaved by? Any ideas? So it's emancipation from the feudal structures. So this is kind of, the feudal structures are the things that have been holding certain aspects of society back. The middle class over a set generation as the producers are able to basically free themselves from those feudal structures, which then eventually will obviously give rise to things like capitalism and other things. So in essence, what Comte is saying, and what we can take away from it, which is the significant thing, is that it's not just, the French Revolution is not just a political event. It should not just be interpreted through the political lens. Rather, there is a significant social aspect to the revolution. So there is a way of interpreting events looking at their social significance. So there is a social interpretation of the French Revolution that he kind of engages in, which links into the whole kind of social dynamics, how societies change, how societies evolve, how they gain a sense of kind of equilibrium. Okay, so the next point that Comte makes is the new system that comes out of the revolution. The new brings positivity. So what he's saying here is, but today, now that this condition is fully satisfied, meaning the modernity project is underway, the kind of old structures have died, and now we have the solidification of the new system, the predominance that the critical tendency still remains is the greatest obstacle to the progress of civilization. What is he saying here? What does he mean? That there's this basically critical tendency that still remains the greatest obstacle. So, when you have, like we said, and I know I'm reiterating this, you have the system, the old structures of the system have basically declined. So this is the old, and that's declined, fading away. And then the new system takes over. Now, in essence, as this system is taking over, there is still negative critique of this new order that's taking place. What Comte is saying is that this change from old to new is kind of inevitable. Therefore, once the change has occurred, we can't critique it in the sense that, because that creates the disorganization. We just need to allow it to materialize and see what it solidifies into. So in essence, what he's saying is, when you have things like the church, which used to basically provide, let's say, the moral authority to the old system, once the church has gone and we embrace the new, meaning human agency and the mind, we have to kind of allow that to evolve. We need people to adopt the new system, adapt to it, and this is what he calls as kind of the organic direction. What he means by organic here is just organization, that we need to basically allow it to materialize. Okay. So another couple of points until we get to the law of the three states. So it's worth noting that Auguste Comte believed that aspects of the Enlightenment philosophy were corrosive to social order. Any ideas why aspects of the Enlightenment thinking might be corrosive to social order? Why would it be corrosive? What aspects would be corrosive? So for Comte, obviously the Enlightenment is a significant period because it symbolizes the kind of liberation from aspects of religion. We have a new source of thinking, the mind, and what we then have is obviously, once the Enlightenment occurs, there are a number of ideals that are put forward. So things like individualism, liberty, sovereignty belonging to the people, and so forth. So these types of things, in some way, these ideals that emerge are good. They're good because they are the things, the tools that were used to break down the old system. So there is a positive in these ideals that they create a new system. However, the new system is somewhat bad because it doesn't have a positive contribution on society. The reason for that is because it creates a society of individuals that isn't organized. It's not bound to things. And maybe that might take time, but that's problematic. And this is why, to some degree, the point here, that Comte says that he has certain kind of positive view, if you will, of medieval Europe. Why would he have some positive view of medieval Europe? So in this kind of, what he's trying to say, what the point is here, is that medieval Europe was bound by certain social structures, right? So you had, say, the church, for example, which was dominant. The church had a monopoly over society, right? So what that meant is the politics, the economics, and the social were all kind of influenced by the church. The church gave the individual citizen their purpose, their viewpoint to solve problems. Now what that creates in society is kind of like a sacred canopy, where many individuals will then draw their identity from that, and that is shared, which gives unity to society. So what he's trying to say is, these social structures play an important role in giving the individuals a common purpose, a common identity. It brought people together. So for example, they drew their identity. You could have, say, for example, someone was an Englishman and their religion was like Church of England, Christian. And so this identity existed across society, which, yes, created a homogeneous society, but a unified society. So the social structures played an important function in keeping everyone united and solidified. Right? So what Comte took from that is that the church, which, okay, might be, the church having a monopoly over society might be bad now, but it had a function. It created unity. It was needed. The people needed this to have that sense of social kind of unity. So from that perspective, he sees it as a positive, the functionality of it. Not necessarily that the church should have monopoly, it's the function of it, what it gives society, the benefit. The other aspect, I'm not really going to dwell on too much. Sometimes Comte is described as adopting a kind of historical relativist approach. So what we mean by that is that ultimately he felt history develops through different states. And so you need to judge a particular state. You remember we said that there's three: the theological, the metaphysical, and the positive, which we're going to look at. You judge a state by its historical context. So what it does, the morality of it then. So even like so today, if we look back at 300 years ago at the morality of the church, it's not something that we would adopt today. It's not consistent with our moral compass. So the church might have prevented same-sex marriage or things like that. But that's the morality of that historical context derived from its kind of source. So in essence, what he's saying is each historical period has its kind of particular perspective and worldview, which you kind of have to just respect. Okay, so this then leads us, we're going to now talk about the law of the three states. Before we do that, we just need to understand that Auguste Comte, if you took his writings and his life, there are two particular phases to his works. There's the early phase and there's the later phase. And his later phase is a shift, a change in intellectual direction or approach. So in the first phase, what he proposes is that science, remember the context of all of this, I hope I made it clear, is post-revolution, disorganization. How do we bind society together? How do we create a unified society after a crisis, after the post-revolution, where all the social structures are falling apart and we're becoming individualistic and there's nothing binding us together as a collective? So society needs to be socially reorganized. So his early approach to this question or this issue was, what you need to do is establish science. Remember, his view of science is that it's sociology, the all-encompassing sociology, which combines all the sciences. We make that part of the connected system. What does that mean, part of the connected system? That means, remember, when we're looking at this kind of functionalist perspective, institutions solve or satisfy our needs. Yeah? So the education system, the political system, economics, etc. Science would function as part of that connected system. So like we said, the human body analogy, where all the vital organs of the human body work together to make the body work, society needs that. Society needs those connected institutions to make society work as an organism. So what he felt is that science would be just one more of a connected system, equal to all the other institutions. That was his early work. So he was saying you need science as part of the connected system to give unity. Reason being, obviously, because religion has gone. Religion has disappeared. Religion has lost its kind of mystique and its reference point, and we need to replace it with science. Science will be that functional tool that will unite people. His later work, he disregards this, and he says, actually, to reconstitute society, science must be the dominant. Science must have a monopoly. So in many ways, it's like that kind of how the church had a monopoly over the politics, the social, the economics. Science should dominate and be a monopoly. So the question then is, okay, how does this happen? So this then leads us to the law of three states. Now, before we discuss the law of three states, we need to understand a principle for Comte, which is ideas create change. So ideas are the fuel for society. These ideas are the things that create change. So it's not the material condition, it's not new technology that creates change in society, it's ideas. So what we have is the Enlightenment. After the Enlightenment, when we have this new set of ideas, our worldview changes. It goes from religion to the source being the human agent, the mind. This shift in ideas is important because then that leads to things like the Industrial Revolution and different political ideologies, democracy, etc. So it's the Enlightenment that triggered progress. So it's ideas that create change, not the material condition, as others argue. So once you have these ideas, the next step is adoption. Adoption is, so once these ideas come about and they create change, people adopt them, embody them as a way, as a tool to interpret society, to understand society. So the idea comes and it is applied, it's manifested on society. We use it in our daily life, in our interactions, to navigate society in the natural world. Once that occurs, then what you have is transformation. The individual is intellectually, mentally, physically transformed into this kind of new person because the ideas have this transformative effect, right? So now what we need to understand then is the law of the three states. The first state is the theological. Remember, these are intellectual jumps that human beings experienced in the development of our species. So the first stage is the theological. This is where human beings start to interpret the world through a religious lens, in a religious way. So what does that mean? So religion creates, very importantly, non-reality. What do we mean by that? Religion creates non-reality. So this non-reality is created when we create a dichotomy between the natural world, the physical world that we sense and perceive, and we create supernature, or the supernatural. Now this is separate to the physical world. It operates on a different set of principles. So in essence, religion creates a dichotomy between the physical world and the supernatural world. That's a separation, that's a duality, that's the kind of earliest building blocks of religion. So in essence, what happens is the supernatural provides explanation to the natural world. Yeah. So why do we have this then? So first off, religion, some might say, emerges out of utility. What do we mean by that? Religion is a byproduct, emerges out of utility. So religion is a human need. We need religion. But then why do we need religion? Why do early people need religion? Why did they create religion? Why did they create the unreal? Why did they create the supernatural? What purpose? What benefit does it give? What utility does it give? Any ideas?
It provides like a list of rules and helps explain things we don't understand.
So a set of rules, i.e., thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, providing social order, a set of meaning systems. Religion explains the natural world. Now the problem is that early human beings, the natural world had power over them. What does that mean? Well, early human beings didn't understand the power and the forces of nature. They didn't know how it functioned, how the sun goes up, why is there rain, why is there famine. These things were part of the natural forces, but there had to be something controlling it, right? There had to be agency behind it. So the earliest religions imbue in nature supernatural. So they say that there has to be some animating force behind the sun that makes it go up and down. There has to be some kind of animating spirit or soul or God behind the rain. So what happens is, in essence, we have religion that forms out of utility because we imbue nature with agency. So we say it has spirit, it has a soul. Then what happens really is we have this thing called fetishism. Now, for Comte, he says that basically fetishism is a power that we create. So we create this power and we personify it in an object. So this is, you could say for example, in parts of Papua New Guinea, they believe in the supernatural power of manna. Now, this is a supernatural force. Now, you can extract this supernatural force and put it in a rock, for example, and then that rock has the power of manna. Now, how might you use this rock? So, this links back to utility. A lot of early religions and people would use it on their crops. So, they would take this rock that has been imbued with manna and rub it on their crops. Why? What's the purpose of that? What are they trying to do? So they're trying to transfer the power of the supernatural. They're trying to transfer the power of manna onto their crops so they would grow. Because they need crops. They need a lot of it. So in essence, it's basically where we can see the formation also of magic. Because magic comes here. Magic, in its simplest sense, is the attempt of humans to harness the power of the supernatural and direct it to the physical world. That's magic in its simplest sense. So according to Comte, would be a fetish, that they made, or manna as well, that basically this rock is a power that they created. The tribe gave it power. It doesn't obviously have any inherent power, it's a rock. But the tribe collectively say that this rock has power within it. It's sacred. So they gave it that personification. They made it real. It has that power to transfer. Now, the next aspect is, that's the early period, the fetish. Then it goes to the polytheistic stage. So what we're talking about here is a creative jump. What do we mean we have the first kind of creative jump in our religious thought? Because here, our religious thought is what Comte is saying evolves. We start with fetish, we go to polytheism, we end up with monotheism. So, in essence, one way of looking at it is, let's say, for example, you start with, you start with basically a belief that an oak tree, this oak tree, has spirit within it. You imbue that one singular oak tree with supernaturalism, that it has power. Then you go and see that actually there are all these different oak trees and they're all alike. So they have the same supernatural power, spirit. But then you see that there are all different types of trees that have a similar spirit. So there had to be one single guiding spirit which controls it, or one God. So out of this comes the god of the forest, for example. So what we see is a refinement of our thought. Now, why does this refinement occur? So, if you look at it, the reason why we have refinement of religious thought is because our understanding of the natural world gets better. So, for example, let's say early people, when they saw fire, they couldn't explain it. It would a bolt of lightning would hit a tree, huge spark of fire would erupt. It had power. This fire would be destructive. It could destroy villages and forests. And they feared it. They feared this power. It was so powerful. So they perhaps worshipped it. They imbued it with spirit, with being a god. But what happens then, when as humans progress, we start to control fire. So we create fire, we get fire, and we can create it in our homes. So now we are manipulating this agent. We are controlling it. We're making fire in our own homes. What does that have as an impact on our religion? So if there was a God controlling the fire, it was this uncontrollable thing, but now humans are creating and controlling fire, then we have become the agents that control it. What happens to the God? The God then is extracted out of nature and placed in the heavens. This is where we have like a pantheon, the kind of polytheistic stage, where basically the gods are extracted out of nature and there's a pantheon of different gods. I'm going to cut a long story short. So then basically this then leads to monotheism, which is basically the single religious deity, right? So this is the first stage, the early thought that they had. The second stage is the metaphysical. The metaphysical for Comte is a transitional stage. We go from belief in spirits and gods, these give way to abstract concepts. What are these abstract concepts? These abstract concepts are things like time, space, gravity. So we've gone basically, the metaphysical is the transition from religion to science. And so in essence, we're bridging the aspects that we've learned from religion, and it's becoming changed. So now we're discovering, through science is becoming new here, we discover things like gravity. Right? So that's a different way of looking at the forces of nature. Before, the forces of nature were controlled by the gods. Now the forces of nature are controlled by these abstract concepts like time, space, etc. Then this leads us to the third stage, the final stage, the stage of basically positivism. So here, positivism here, as kind of Comte argued, is literally the idea of rock bottom. You take matter, reality, and reduce it to its basic form, which is the physical. Once you reduce the thing, the object, the phenomenon to the physical, you can test it. So you can observe it, you can measure it, you record it, right? So you can then basically prove it as fact. So this is positivism, yeah? That taking an object, a phenomenon, and proving it through the scientific method in its simplest sense. So positivism has three stages. You have the metaphysical transition, which is basically, like we said, human beings realizing and discovering, while using science, the physical world. So the physical world now is not caused by God. The physical world is to be understood. So we're using things like cause and effect to understand natural phenomena. Then we have polyscience, which is obviously many sciences. For Comte, this is his present. He existed in this period of polyscience, right? Where you have many sciences and they have their separate boundaries, their separate disciplines. And so what he envisaged is that the next stage would be monoscience, the singular science. Sociology would become the all-uniting mechanism that would unify all the sciences under its kind of domain. So sociology, in essence, would be the single unifying force for society. Yeah? Just finishing off, because I know we're running out of time. So, in essence, what Comte is saying is that, look, when you have an upheaval, a change, you need a period of reorganizing. And the old structures have collapsed. But religion, for example, gave society unity. It gave them balance. It provided equilibrium. So if we lose that, we need to replace it, and it needs to be replaced with the science of sociology, or the science of society, which he termed sociology. That is the thing that will replace religion and provide a connective function. So it basically will create equilibrium. It will bind people to it. So people will go to science as the new church. That will be its reference point. That will be the focus, even doing things around it. So he even advocated having the Church of Positivity, because it should basically fulfill a function that's redundant, that's missing in society. I think, again, we've kind of run out of time. I think what we'll do, we'll end there, and anything that we missed is becoming a bad tendency, we'll try to catch up on in week 5. So again, sorry. So anyway, next week we're going to be looking at the Americas.